One old photograph that changed our life forever. Love listening to people share their stories? Hit that subscribe button. And let's go. It started with a photo. A stupid, innocent photo tucked into the back of an old album I found while cleaning out my parents' attic. I was looking for baby pictures of our twins, Lily and Max, to show at their 5th birthday party. Instead, I found a picture of my husband Daniel as a child, except it wasn't Daniel. It was his father. At least, that's what I thought at first. The resemblance was uncanny. Same dark hair, same crooked smile, even the same dimple in his left cheek. But the date on the back of the photo stopped me cold, 1978. Daniel was born in 1985. There was no way this was his father. So who was it? I showed the photo to Daniel that night, expecting him to laugh it off. Instead, he went pale. "Where did you find this?" he asked, his voice tight. "In my parents' attic," I said. "Why? Who is it?" He didn't answer right away. He just stared at the photo, his hands trembling. Finally, he said, "That's my uncle. My dad's brother. He died before I was born." I frowned. "I didn't know you had an uncle." "I don't talk about him," Daniel said, his tone sharp. "It's complicated." I wanted to press him, but something in his expression stopped me. He looked scared, almost guilty. It was the first time I'd ever seen him like that, and it made my stomach twist. The next few days were tense. Daniel was quieter than usual, and he kept avoiding my questions about the photo. I tried to let it go, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. So, I did something I'd never done before. I started digging. I called my mom and asked her about the photo. She was hesitant at first, but eventually, she admitted that Daniel's uncle, Michael, had been a close friend of the family. "He was like a brother to me," she said. "But he died young. It was a tragedy." "How did he die?" I asked. There was a long pause. "It's not my place to say," she finally replied. "You should talk to Daniel." But Daniel wasn't talking. Every time I brought it up, he shut me down. "It's in the past," he'd say. "Let it go." I couldn't let it go. Not when I kept finding little things that didn't add up. Like the fact that Daniel's parents had moved across the country shortly after he was born and never talked about their life before. Or the way Daniel's dad always seemed uncomfortable around my family, like he was hiding something. The final straw came when I found an old letter in the attic. It was addressed to my mom, and it was from Michael. The handwriting was shaky, like he'd been crying when he wrote it. "I can't do this anymore," it said. "I love her, but it's tearing me apart. I have to leave." I didn't know who her was, but I had a sinking feeling it was my mom. I confronted Daniel that night. "What aren't you telling me?" I demanded, holding up the letter. "Who was Michael, really? And why does it feel like everyone's hiding something?" Daniel looked at me for a long time, his face unreadable. Finally, he said, "Sit down. There's something I need to tell you." Daniel's voice was quiet, almost a whisper, as he said, "Sit down. There's something I need to tell you." My heart was pounding as I sat across from him at the kitchen table. The letter from Michael was still in my hand, and I could feel the weight of it like it was burning through my skin. Daniel ran a hand through his hair, his usual confident demeanor replaced by something I'd never seen before, fear. "Michael wasn't just my uncle," he began, his eyes fixed on the table. "He was my biological father." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I stared at him, trying to process what he'd just said. "What are you talking about? Your dad is Robert. You've always called him Dad." Daniel shook his head. "Robert raised me, but he's not my biological father. My mom had an affair with Michael. I didn't find out until I was a teenager. My parents sat me down and told me the truth. Michael was Robert's younger brother. He died in a car accident a few months after I was born." I felt like the room was spinning. "Why didn't you tell me this before? We've been married for 8 years, Daniel. We have kids together. How could you keep something like this from me?" He looked up at me, his eyes filled with guilt. "I wanted to tell you. I did. But every time I tried, I couldn't find the words. It's not exactly something you bring up on a first date. Hey, by the way, my dad isn't really my dad, and my uncle is actually my biological father. It's messed up, okay? I didn't want you to think less of me." "Think less of you?" I said, my voice rising. "Daniel, this isn't about me judging you. This is about trust. You should have told me, especially before we had kids. What if this affects them? What if there's some genetic thing we don't know about?" He flinched at that, and I immediately regretted saying it. But the truth was I was scared. Scared of what this meant for us, for our family. Scared of what else he might be hiding. The next few days were a blur. I couldn't stop thinking about what Daniel had told me. I kept replaying our relationship in my head, wondering if there were signs I'd missed. But the more I thought about it, the more questions I had. Why had Michael and my mom been so close? Why had he written her that letter? And why had Daniel's parents moved across the country after Michael died? I decided to call my mom again. This time, I wasn't going to let her off the hook. "Mom," I said as soon as she answered, "I need you to tell me the truth about Michael. All of it." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Finally, she sighed. I was afraid this would come out someday. What would come out? I asked, my stomach churning. Michael and I, we were in love, she said, her voice trembling. But he was married. To Daniel's mom. It was a mess. We tried to end it, but we couldn't stay away from each other. When I got pregnant with you, we thought it was his. But then you were born, and it was obvious you weren't. You looked just like your father. I felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. Wait, are you saying Michael thought I was his daughter? Yes, my mom said. And when he found out I wasn't pregnant with his child, he was devastated. He wrote me that letter and left town. A few months later, he died in that car accident. I always wondered if it was really an accident, or if he couldn't live with the guilt. I didn't know what to say. My mind was racing, trying to piece together what this meant. If Michael was Daniel's biological father, and my mom had been involved with him, then... Mom, I said slowly, does this mean Daniel and I are related? There was another long pause. No, she said finally. You're not related by blood. But it's complicated. Your father and Michael were close friends, almost like brothers. And Daniel's parents, they never really got over what happened. That's why they moved away. They couldn't bear to be around me, knowing what I'd done. I hung up the phone, my head spinning. It was a lot to process. Daniel and I weren't related, but our families were intertwined in ways I'd never imagined. And now I had to figure out how to move forward, not just for me, but for our kids. That night, I sat down with Daniel and told him everything my mom had said. He listened quietly, his face pale. When I finished, he looked at me and said, I'm so sorry. I should have told you the truth from the beginning. I didn't want to lose you. I reached out and took his hand. You're not going to lose me, I said. But we need to be honest with each other from now on. No more secrets. Okay. He nodded, tears in his eyes. Okay. The days after Daniel's confession and my conversation with my mom were a whirlwind of emotions. I felt like I was living in a fog, trying to process everything while still keeping it together for our kids. Lily and Max were too young to understand what was going on, but they could sense the tension between Daniel and me. They kept asking why Daddy was so quiet or why Mommy looked sad. It broke my heart to lie to them, but how could I explain something I didn't fully understand myself? Daniel and I tried to act normal around the kids, but the truth hung between us like a heavy curtain. We barely spoke unless it was about the twins or household chores. When we did talk, it was strained, like we were both walking on eggshells. I wanted to forgive him for keeping such a huge secret, but every time I looked at him, I felt a mix of anger, betrayal, and confusion. How could he have kept this from me? And more importantly, what did it mean for our family? One night, after the kids were asleep, I finally broke the silence. We need to figure this out, I said, sitting across from Daniel at the kitchen table. We can't just pretend nothing happened. He nodded, his face pale and drawn. I know. I've been thinking about it nonstop. I don't know where to start. How about we start with the truth? I said, try to keep my voice steady. All of it. No more secrets. He took a deep breath and nodded again. Okay, what do you want to know? Everything, I said. Start from the beginning. Daniel told me the story he'd been carrying for years. His parents, Robert and Linda, had been married for 5 years when Michael came into the picture. Michael was Robert's younger brother, charming and reckless, and he'd always had a way of stirring up trouble. When he moved back to town after a failed business venture, he and Linda grew close. Too close. My mom always said it was a mistake, Daniel said, his voice low. She said she never meant to hurt my dad, but Michael was different. He made her feel alive in a way she hadn't felt in years. They had an affair, and when she got pregnant with me, she didn't know who the father was. I felt a pang of sympathy for Linda, but it was quickly overshadowed by the realization of what this meant. So you could be Robert's son, I said. Or Michael's. Daniel nodded. Yeah. My parents didn't find out the truth until after I was born. They did a paternity test, and it came back that Michael was my father. My dad, he was devastated. But he stayed. He raised me as his own, even though it killed him inside. And Michael? I asked. What happened to him? Daniel's face darkened. He couldn't handle it. He loved my mom, but he couldn't face what he'd done to his brother. He left town and died in a car accident a few months later. My mom always said it was his guilt that killed him. I sat back, trying to process everything. It was like something out of a soap opera, affairs, paternity secrets, tragic deaths. But this wasn't a TV show. This was my life. My family. The next day, I decided to dig deeper. I needed to know the full story, not just Daniel's version of it. I reached out to Linda, Daniel's mom. She was hesitant to talk at first, but when I told her I knew about Michael, she broke down. I never wanted any of this to happen, she said, her voice shaking. I loved Robert, but Michael, he was like a drug. I couldn't stay away from him. And when I got pregnant, I thought it was Robert's. I really did. But when the test came back, I'll never forget the look on Robert's face. It was like I destroyed him. "Why did you stay together?" I asked. "Because we loved each other," she said simply. "And because of Daniel. We didn't want him to grow up without a father. But it wasn't easy. Robert never really forgave me, and I never forgave myself. That's why we moved away. We needed a fresh start." I felt a lump in my throat. Linda's pain was palpable, and for the first time, I understood why Daniel had kept this secret for so long. It wasn't just his story, it was his parents' story too. And it was messy and painful and complicated in ways I couldn't even imagine. But there was still one question I needed answered. "Do you think Michael's death was really an accident?" I asked. Linda hesitated. "I don't know," she said finally. "He was drinking a lot after he left. He called me a few times, crying, saying he couldn't live with what he'd done. I always wondered if he did it on purpose." Her words sent a chill down my spine. The idea that Michael might have taken his own life out of guilt was heartbreaking, but it also made me realize how deeply this secret had affected everyone involved. It wasn't just a family scandal, it was a tragedy that had shaped Daniel's life in ways I was only beginning to understand. That night, I sat down with Daniel and told him everything I'd learned from Linda. He listened quietly, his face a mask of pain and regret. When I finished, he looked at me and said, "I'm so sorry. I never wanted to drag you into this. I didn't know how to tell you." I reached out and took his hand. "I get it," I said, "but we're in this together now, and we need to figure out how to move forward. For us and for the kids." He nodded, tears in his eyes. "I love you," he said, "and I'm so sorry for keeping this from you." "I love you too," I said, "but no more secrets, okay? From now on, we face everything together." He squeezed my hand. Together. After weeks of sleepless nights, tearful conversations, and endless soul-searching, Daniel and I finally reached a decision. We would keep the truth about his parentage and our family's tangled history to ourselves. The people who already knew, my mom, his parents, and us, would be the only ones who ever did. No one else needed to carry the weight of this secret, especially not our children. It wasn't an easy decision. Part of me wanted to shout the truth from the rooftops, to release the pressure that had been building inside me since I found that photo. But the other part of me knew that some secrets are better left buried. This wasn't just about protecting Daniel or his parents, it was about protecting Lily and Max. They were too young to understand the complexities of what had happened, and they didn't deserve to be burdened with a legacy of guilt and shame. We sat down with my mom and Daniel's parents to make sure everyone was on the same page. It was an awkward meeting, to say the least. My mom and Linda barely made eye contact, and Robert looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. But when Daniel explained our decision, they all agreed. No one wanted this secret to go any further. "It's in the past," Robert said, his voice gruff but firm. "Let's leave it there." Linda nodded, tears in her eyes. "I've spent my whole life running from this. I don't want my grandchildren to grow up under its shadow." My mom reached out and took my hand. "You're doing the right thing," she said. "Some things are better left unsaid." As for having more children, that decision came easily. We'd always talked about having a big family, but now the idea filled me with dread. What if there were more secrets we didn't know about? What if there were genetic risks we hadn't considered? And most importantly, how could we bring another child into a family with such a complicated history? "I think we're done," I said to Daniel one night as we sat on the couch, the twins asleep in their rooms. "Lily and Max are enough. They're perfect." He nodded, his arm around my shoulders. "I agree. We don't need more kids to be a family. We just need to focus on the ones we have." It was a bittersweet moment. I'd always imagined having 3 or 4 children, but now that dream felt like a relic of a simpler time. A time before I knew the truth about Daniel's past. A time before our family became so complicated. The hardest part was figuring out how to move forward. We couldn't just pretend nothing had happened, but we also couldn't let it consume us. So, we made a conscious effort to focus on the present. We spent more time with Lily and Max, taking them to the park, playing games, and creating new memories. We started family traditions like Friday movie nights and Sunday pancake breakfasts to give them a sense of stability and normalcy. Daniel and I also started seeing a couples therapist. It wasn't easy to open up about everything we'd been through, but it helped. We learned how to communicate better, how to rebuild the trust that had been broken, and how to support each other through the ups and downs. It wasn't a quick fix, but it was a start. Therapy also helped us come to terms with the fact that we couldn't change the past. What happened between Michael, Linda, and Robert was their story, not ours. We couldn't undo their choices or erase their pain, but we could choose how we moved forward. And we chose to focus on the family we built together, a family that was messy and imperfect but full of love. Years later, as I watched Lily and Max play in the backyard, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't felt in a long time. They were happy, healthy, and completely unaware of the secrets that had shaped their parents' lives. And that was exactly how we wanted it. Daniel came up behind me, wrapping his arms around my waist. "They're amazing, aren't they?" he said, his voice filled with pride. "They are," I said, leaning into him. "We did good, Daniel. Despite everything, we did good." He kissed the top of my head. "We did." The truth about Daniel's parentage and our family's tangled history would always be a part of us, but it didn't define us. We'd made our peace with it, and we built a life we were proud of. A life centered on love, honesty, and the two little people who meant more to us than anything else in the world. And in the end, that was enough. Thanks for your time. Don't forget to subscribe and comment your thoughts, and I will see you in the next.